or they've stalled on authorizing much needed renovations on primary and secondary school facilities within the conservation area. Human Rights Watch learned of several schools in the conservation area in poor conditions as a result of the NCA authorities' refusal to release funds or issue permits for improvements to primary and secondary schools. And there are clear examples where the Conservation Authority has released funds in 2021 and then later on refused to authorize for construction to actually happen. So we know that this is a targeted effort to stop any type of improvements on these facilities on the part of the authorities. So this decrease in basic social services is compounded by an existing complete ban on crop cultivation that has been in effect since 1975. And this was mainly to support biodiversity conservation. In 1992, the then Prime Minister temporarily waived the ban due to public outcry related to food insecurity concerns. The ban on cultivation is still in effect and has led to food insecurity and health implications for community members within the conservation area. Residents we talked to acknowledged that the Conservation Authority provides maize at a subsidized price, but in the last 3 years, residents have lost trust in the government due to the tactics that the government has put in place to put pressure on them to leave. And some have refused to purchase the maize due to reasons that my colleagues will speak more on in the next presentations. These government tactics and restrictions have made life increasingly difficult for residents in the conservation area, forcing many to register for relocation. There are also clear issues with the government's relocation procedures. As Allan had mentioned, the government's relocation and resettlement processes have reinforced gender inequality. Based on international law, the government should not be putting in place any policies or projects or programs that further embed inequality within a community. But the way that the government uses a head of household designation in this context, which is often considered a man who then registers the family for relocation, there isn't any requirement that all adults should be willing to relocate. So when the time comes to relocate the head of household who has registered, the government destroys the family's homestay, the boma, leaving any relatives, including wives, who refuse to relocate and opt to stay behind, homeless and dependent on extended family. Human Rights Watch identified several women who were not involved in registering, refused to move with their husbands, and were left homeless. These challenges and rights violations speak to the fact that people who register are not doing so voluntarily. My colleague will speak to our other findings that illustrate why Human Rights Watch concludes that these relocations are forced evictions, which are prohibited by international and regional human rights law. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliana, for expanding on some of the findings of the report. I'm sure there are some questions that will come from this presentation, as well as Mr. Maura's. But let's continue to Mr. Oryem Nyeko, who's a senior researcher in the Africa division at Human Rights Watch. Oryem, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Allan, and to everybody who's attending this press conference. I'm going to be going over 3 areas, which illustrate, as Juliana mentioned, how what is taking place in the Ngorongoro conservation area, as well as in Somera, amount to rights violations, specifically the rights of indigenous people, and amount to the forced eviction. The first area I wanted to talk about and give illustrative examples based on the research that we've been doing for the last 2 years is to talk about how residents of both the Ngorongoro Conservation Area and Msomera have faced very high levels of intimidation for speaking out against what is taking place. Many people who we spoke to said that they can't speak out against the relocation and express their views about what is taking place because of the threats and intimidation that they've received, both from rangers that are employed by the Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority, as well as other security forces in the country. So this has created a climate of fear. In fact, one person in Msomera told us that they're not allowed to say anything and that they have a sense of fear in their hearts. People in the NCA who are opposed to the relocation and who have organized themselves into groups to speak out about it told us that they've received phone calls from unknown people, or in some cases known people, who threaten them and ask them why they are talking about the government. Despite these threats, people continue to speak out, as we've seen in many instances. People continue to organize, but this climate is getting increasingly difficult. It's not possible to speak in Tanzania about what is taking place in the NCA without facing those kinds of reprisals. The same thing is happening in Msomera. The residents there have been labeled as trespassers and squatters, and they've been threatened with arrest or being evicted from their homes if they protest or talk to the media about what is happening, about people being moved into an area that they've lived in themselves for decades. One person told us from Msomera that they'd organized as a group and then had decided to speak to the media to say what was going on in Msomera, but they were summoned by the police to the police station in Handeni, which is a couple of kilometers away from Msomera, and they were questioned and told by the police to stop speaking publicly about what was taking place. The call that we are making is that the Tanzania government should respect the rights of people who are impacted by what is taking place to express their views about what is happening. The second area that I wanted to talk about is about the physical assault and abuses that residents of the Ngorongoro Conservation Area are facing, specifically violence that has been perpetrated by the Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority rangers, whose relationship with the community there has deteriorated dramatically since the relocation process began around 2022. We actually documented at least 13 cases between September 2022 and 2023 of beatings by NCAA rangers of residents of the NCA, and they seem to have escalated around September 2022. That's not to say that they were not happening before and have not happened since. It's also possible that there could be more instances, but the number of cases that we were able to actually put together and document were 13, which is 13 more than should ever happen. I'll give you an example. There was an incident in September 2022 of a man, of a 35-year-old man in Nainokanoka, who was just walking in his community, and the NCAA rangers made him kneel in a style called kichura, which is basically like walking like a frog. It's a frog style walk, and they beat him using a stick. The problem is, and this is what people repeatedly mention to us, is that people don't have anywhere to report. They can't go to the police and they can't report to the rangers because those are the people who themselves are perpetrating these abuses. There were several other instances of people being physically attacked because of owning a motorcycle, which is prohibited inside the NCA, but is no reason for people to be beaten or subjected to those kinds of abuses. Our call here is that the authorities, the Tanzanian government, should require and ensure that the rangers, the NCAA rangers specifically, are trained appropriately in international and national human rights law and standards, and that they're subject to an effective, independent oversight and accountability mechanism. And also, most importantly, that they are held to account, including the commanding officers who have engaged in the type of misconduct, and that they are appropriately disciplined and subjected to judicial avenues. Finally, I wanted to talk about the issue of consultation. So we found that in both Msomera and in the Ngorongoro conservation area, as we've discussed earlier, that consultation was entirely inadequate. So in the Ngorongoro conservation area specifically, the standard that we found that was not met was to ensure that there was free, prior, and informed consent of the people, the Maasai people living in the NCA. Free, prior, and informed consent is a right that is distinct for indigenous people and is consistent with international law and standards. The purpose is to ensure that indigenous people, in this case Maasai people, can determine their political status and pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. It means that they can give or withhold consent to a project that can affect them or their territories, and that they have the ability to negotiate the conditions under which that land that they live on, their territories, their resources that they use are impacted. A government or any authority cannot relocate indigenous people from their land or territories without their free, prior, and informed consent, and only after agreement that on a fair compensation. In our research, we document in the report about a meeting Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa had in 2022 February, which it seemed was to socialize the plan for the government to relocate from the NCA to Msomera. But people who attended this meeting, they said it really wasn't a consultation. It was simply for the Prime Minister to give instructions on how people should register to relocate. People consistently told us that the authorities never came to Ngorongoro to know what their issues are, what the problems that they were facing are, or actually meaningfully engaged with them. Similarly, in Msomera, the government didn't hold consultative meetings with the communities who lived there. People there simply learned about what was going on when contractors came there to survey the land, to demarcate it, and to construct the building. And this happened around February of 2022. People told us they just saw these people coming in one day. There was a convoy of about 60 vehicles, including some with the regional commissioners for Tanga, Arusha, and Manyara regions. They came and looked and never said anything, is what they told us. And then a couple of days later, the construction began. Our call here is that if any process like this is going to take place, that would be adequate consultation, and that the free, prior, and informed consent of affected indigenous communities in the Ngorongoro conservation area, as well as the residents of Msomera who have been impacted, must be adequately consulted. That means that information should be provided to all of the communities, and that their participation in any discussions and decision-making should include them gender and youth representative and responsive, and ensure that their rights are protected. My colleague Dennis, I hope, will also elaborate on some of the impacts of this, but that's where I conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Oryem, for describing in the detail that you have the rights violations related to those findings in the report around the lack of free, prior, and informed consent, but also the rights violations in terms of the abuses that the Maasai in Ngorongoro have endured in response to their contestations on the evictions. Mzungumzaji wa mwisho ni wakili Dennis Oleshangay, ni mwanasheria na mwanaharakati anayeishi Ngorongoro. Amekuwa akiwatetea Wamasai katika kesi kadhaa nchini Tanzania na pia katika mahakama ya Muungano wa Afrika Mashariki. Wakili Dennis, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Allan. And also, people who are following, I will start by, I will be covering the issue of restriction and also the impact of this relocation in both Ngorongoro and Msomera. And maybe because Oryem has already said a lot on the issue of Msomera, I'll be covering about the impact. Now, since the start of this issue of relocation, the governments started like in 2021 when President Samia issued a directive that the Ngorongoro conservation area is at a brink of extinction. And only 6 days later, the Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority issued the notices instructing some people to move out of the area and also some houses to be demolished, including schools, including health facilities, and other important buildings. Many of them are the government buildings. Then many restriction has to follow that directives. In Ngorongoro, the conservation area started by assaulting people in NCA. The headers have been attacked by the Ngorongoro Rangers. We reported to the police, and the police refused to take some actions. Then again, the issue of restriction, people are restricted to access all important places, especially the 3 craters and the other important places for pasture, water, and salt licks. And now the community has to pay the consequences. In 2016, the government directed people not to go inside Ngorongoro crater for pasture, water, and salt lick, that the government and Ngorongoro conservation area will provide them in their villages. What the government did after, they supplied a salt lick in 5 villages in vicinity to Ngorongoro crater, which later now discovered by more than 3 government credible laboratories that the salt lick is contaminated and unsafe for livestock consumption. And in fact, they say the salt lick contains some leads material which attack bone marrows, and it started consume the south end of livestock in Ngorongoro. And many communities in those villages remained poor. Those places also are not only vital for pasture, but also has also some cultural significance. The community in time immemorial has been going, they were been going there for some cultural practices, like the rite of passage during initiation times. The barren women used to go there study. And again, even those who relocated from Ngorongoro, not all of them were given houses or farms. you can find like a family of more than 10 people were dumped in one house, and only compensation is paid the father only. So the rest were not considered. Only 3 months ago, they wrote, more than 100 people wrote a letter to President Samia, telling her like they need to be paid the compensation. But NCA responded to them like no one supposed to be paid because they were already paid. They also claimed like no enough pasture land. Many of them said they lost many livestock because of insufficient pasture land and no enough land for farming. And they want now to return back to Ngorongoro. And now the government tell them like they never turn back. So the problems are from all corners, center, left, and right. And again, in Ngorongoro, the issue of political rallies. In 2023, the Chadema leader, Tundu Lissu, was also denied access to Ngorongoro for political rallies, that the government and the NCAA tell him like Ngorongoro is not a suitable place for political rallies. And the same thing again repeated in 1 month ago, when Chadema tried to go to Ngorongoro for a political rally, then the government denied him. So all this problem is to try to force people to move out by force. And is this also another evidence that the process is not voluntary? We also saw like the documents circulating on social media contains all register the police station in the country, but the villages in Ngorongoro are missing. So this disenfranchisement is also another evidence that we deny them right to vote so that they can move away of their area. So the process of relocation in general is forceful and unlawful and also morally unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wakili Oleshangay, for explaining in detail the experiences of the Maasai communities and the disenfranchisement of the Maasai community for the upcoming elections. I think we have heard from this group of eminent panelists on what the real challenges are on this forcible transfer of the Maasai community from Ngorongoro to Msomera, but also the effects of this relocation to the residents of Msomera are quite a number of findings which are available in the report for more detail. We have a few minutes before we have to come to an end of this press conference, but I will open to any questions or any comments from the floor, from the participants. You will see in the chat that the link to the report has been posted and you can have access to that full report and the press release in both English and Swahili. Please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to raise any question or give a comment. Right, I do see two hands. The first is Liza. You have the floor. Please ask your question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Sorry, it's pretty late out here. So my question is, if this media can is people can hear all over the world? That's my really question, because I think this is really we want something the world really to know and recognize, and we need the world for sure to stop Tanzania government not do what they're doing right now for the Maasai people. So my question is, if this media is people how do people can access to get this news?
Thank you very much, Olutumi. Let's go to Sunday Kinyanjui. Sunday Kinyanjui, are you able to speak? If not, let's move on to Benson Wakoli. Benson, you have the floor.
Hello.
Okay,
Hello.
Mr. Sunday, please continue.
Thanks so much. Congrats for Human Rights Watch. Hello.
Yes,
In fact, we are so happy to hear Human Rights Watch about how the situation in Ngorongoro. In fact, social and political rights are denied in the area. And I think the International Convention and the Covenants denies this. And I think you have described about the political and economic rights that the area are denied. And I stress that let the Human Rights Watch stipulate this to the international community so that they can halt the Tanzania government to stop this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kinyanjui. Let's go to Benson Wakoli. Bwana Wakoli, you have the floor. Okay, there might be some technical challenges there, but let me just respond to Olutumi's question about this report. It is indeed going to be, it is live on our website. The link is posted on our chat, but it is available on the Human Rights Watch website, as well as the press release that is in both English and Kiswahili. So this is a process that has not just begun now with this writing of this report. Both Oryem and Juliana have been documenting the rights violations against the Maasai communities in Ngorongoro for some time, and in fact also convened a side event on the margins of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights session that happened in October in Arusha last year. And we had the privilege of having a number of participants from the communities in Loliondo who physically came and engaged with the commission on these ongoing issues. So we do have an advocacy plan to ensure that we continue engaging not just the authorities in Tanzania, but also regional authorities on raising this specific issue. And like you rightly mentioned, Mr. Kinyanjui, that these are violations that contravene the international human rights treaties that Tanzania is a party to, and therefore they need as colleagues explained, for redress, compensation, and remedy in the appropriate fashion. I'm able to speak now. Right, let me turn then to our panelists and if you have any parting shots or responses to what you've heard so far. I will start in reverse order. Wakili Oleshangay, you go first.
Ngorongoro, the is so serious. They don't know what to do, but still strong and mobilized. We need to, because they've mentioned about the human rights report, on whether now can go to the world. The only issue is that we need the world is aware of what is going on. We need to put it public. We tell the government of Tanzania to stop fighting with these people. Need to restore and now allow all people to all social services in the area, allow them to vote, allow them to access the important places for pasture, water, salt lake, and also areas of cultural significance, to allow people to enter in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, their home, without restriction. Chance to air their voices at the rest of Tanzanians according to the constitution and the country laws and also international instruments. All this need to be done by the government as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Oleshangay. Oryem?
Thanks so much. I just maybe have one point that I would like to reiterate and emphasize that what's happening in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, as well as Somera is a very complicated issue with very many human rights issues. But I think one thing that's important to flag is also an issue of the rights of indigenous peoples. Maasai being one of many groups who around the world whose rights are oftentimes not protected in the way they should be. And with the World Day for Indigenous Peoples coming up in about a week or so, I think this is an important time to remind us all of the importance of protecting these communities' rights and ensuring that they are respected. That's it. I have a sense that
I think I'll just piggyback on what Oryem has said and say that it doesn't matter what type of justice that present about diversity laws. There is no circumstance in which contributes human rights. The government, the Tanzanian government, or any government cannot put in place a plan for biodiversity conservation that violates the rights of humans who already exist within that area without their involvement, without meaningfully consulting them, without seeking their consent, and making sure that they participate before the plan is developed, and also participate while they're implementing the plan, and also after. And of course, there should always be the option for Indigenous people to decide to return, because there is a right to return based on international law. So they should be given that option. Any compensation that is people who do choose to be relocated should happen with negotiation with them and their leaders, and based on their consent. They should accept the compensation before they're relocated, not after relocated, because at that point they don't have any, or basically the leg to stand on, as you would say, but negotiate or compensation after the fact just is not the way that it should happen, based on how guidelines on displacement for development that exist within the international human rights system. So human rights violations should not be happening because we want to conserve biodiversity or for tourism. Context in northern Tanzania.
And finally, Mr. Maura. Is that Maura, please?
So Maura, you're muted.
You're on mute.
There. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. What I can say shortly, after remarks from me, the life of community in NCA yesterday was a little bit better. It is today and tomorrow. We really have a very worse and difficult time. So what I can say, I can just ask the Human Watch and all other human agents to be the voice of the Maasai in the area, because we know that our life is continue to be more difficult than what it is now. So kindly asking you, human rights and all others, human defenders, to ensure that you'll continuously be the voice of the Maasai community, so that we can try if we can save the life of these people, because we know this is the year of the election and we have other more and worse restriction that was not even included on you right now. So thank you, brothers.
Thank you very much, Maura, for your closing remarks.
Yes.
To try to depend on Juliana. The information is available. Press release. The content information is available. Would be happy to speak to media and others might be interested in getting further details on this. Let me take this last opportunity to thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Maura. Thank you, Mr. for your contribution to this press conference. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Oryem, for your hard work in this report. It is truly a work that speaks on behalf of the community that have been enfranchised and whose rights need to be violated. And seemingly no redress available. So we'll continue pushing. Thank you very much for this webinar.